Good evening, one and all. We welcome you all to the international webinar series on holistic health, well-being, and sustainable development 2025, commemorating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, nation celebrating 77 years of independence, and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2015 to 2030, and Viksit Bharat at 2047. As part of awareness and campaigns in collaboration with Sri Holistic Health Foundation India and Sri Research Institute Center for Art, Sciences and Wellbeing. Before we start our sessions, let's take the blessings of Almighty.
कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शत्रुबुद्धिविनाशाय दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः.
With the blessings of Almighty, we shall continue with today's commemorations and sessions. Today, we are on the 5th day of International Conference on World Breastfeeding Week and World Breastfeeding Breastfeeding, Diet, Nutrition, Parenting, Education, Health and Well-being, Environment and Sustainable Development 2025 as part of World Breastfeeding Week celebrations 2025. So, yesterday we were talking about various aspects and various trends and focus areas like code monitoring, codex alimentarius, contaminants in baby foods, health and environmental impacts, infant feeding in emergencies, and World Breastfeeding Trends Initiative, in short known as WTTI. So today we will look at various other aspects of breastfeeding, why breastfeeding is important, breastfeeding as a norm for infant and young child feeding. As we have reiterated, and since past 4 days, we were talking about importance of breastfeeding and also its impact on health and well-being and sustainable development, as well as the various factors that are impacting health and well-being, and those factors and various other factors that are impacting breastfeeding. So breastfeeding as a norm for infant and young child feeding since time immemorial. The human species has been fed and nurtured mother's milk at the normal continuum from pregnancy through birthing. Breastfeeding is the bond that sustains the mother-baby relationship and provides the perfect nutrition, immunological protection, and optimal physical and neurological development for the first 5 years of life. So scientific research has shown as the critical importance of breastfeeding. It is irreplaceable as a way to feed children. Its intricate composition to both protect and nourish, its capacity to perfectly match growth and development needs, make it an irreplaceable way to feed babies. Breastfeeding is vital for child survival and also important for mother's health. Breastfeeding contributes positively to the nation's economy, to employers, families, and communities. Breastfeeding is important for children. Before a baby is born, the uterus protects him or her against most of the germs to which the mother is exposed. After birth, the mother's breast milk continues to protect against many of the viruses. So, bacteria and parasites to which the body or the baby is now exposed. Several substances in breast milk not only prevent diseases, some stimulate and strengthen the development of the baby's immature immune system. This results in better health even years after breastfeeding has ended, to the extent of lifelong. For these and other reasons, based on scientific evidence, the World Health Assembly has adopted as a public health recommendation that babies should be fed exclusively on breast milk for 6 months and continue to breastfeeding at least until 2 years of age. Breastfeeding promotes child survival. If all babies were fed only breast milk for the first 6 months of life, the lives of an estimated 1.5 million infants would be saved every year, and the health and development of millions of others would be greatly improved, states UNICEF in its 2002 edition of Facts of Life. In resource poor settings, exclusive breastfeeding may be best option for HIV mothers. This is confirmed by the November 2006 World Health Organization. Consensus statement on HIV and infant feeding. Breastfeeding is an essential means of providing food security for millions of infants worldwide, and even more so in developing countries and in regions having to cope with war, conflict, population displacement, natural disasters, or economic crisis. Butta et al. Study shows that how breastfeeding initiation immediately after birth is one of the more effective interventions. Breastfeeding protects against infectious diseases, otitis media. Middle ear infections are one of the most frequent reasons for seeing the doctor. In US study, infants from birth to 12 months who were not breastfed had twice as many ear infections as babies who were exclusively breastfed for about 4 months. Diarrhea. The antibodies in a mother's milk protect her baby from the germs causing diarrhea. In poor communities, diarrhea caused by bottle feeding is responsible for acute sickness. The cycle of illness, dehydration, and malnutrition weakens the child, often totally and fatally. A study from the Republic of Belarus shows that infants exclusively breastfeeding at 3 months have 40% less of developing gastrointestinal infections. Pneumonia. Worldwide, pneumonia is one of the leading causes of death in children under 5 years of age. A study in Brazil showed that the risk of hospitalization for pneumonia among non-breastfed infants was 17 times greater than that for breastfed infants. So, breastfeeding protects against asthma and other allergies. In Australia, risk of childhood asthma decreases by at least 40% in infants breastfed for 4 months. A Medline review of 12 studies relating breastfeeding and asthma points out that exclusive breastfeeding reduced the risk of asthma by 30% and showed still better results, 48%, in families with a history of asthma related illness. Breastfeeding confers optimal cognitive, linguistic, and motor development. In Denmark, a recent study confirmed that breastfeeding affected brain development as measured in child's ability to crawl, to grip, and to babble in polysyllables. The longer the duration of breastfeeding, the higher child's capacities. Long-term importance of breastfeeding on health. So, bone mass. In Tanzania, a study demonstrated that there was a significant association between breastfeeding in infancy and higher bone mineral density among the 8-year-old boys examined in comparison with children that has not been breastfed. So, Haemophilus influenza meningitis in Sweden, a study showed that low breastfeeding rates were followed 5 to 10 years later by increased meningitis rates. Obesity in a number of countries, Germany, Czech Republic, the UK, the USA, research demonstrates that breastfeeding reduces the risk of obesity and overweight. Breastfeeding is important for mothers. Breastfeeding is an integral part of the reproductive cycle. Exclusive breastfeeding, followed at 6 months by the introduction of appropriate complementary foods. Continued breastfeeding until the age of 2 years or more brings the reproductive full cycle. Studies have shown that there are many women for whom contraception is unavailable, unaffordable, or unacceptable. For these women, breastfeeding occurring according to LAM criteria mentioned below is the primary means of delaying a pregnancy and spacing births. Moreover, breastfeeding develops emotional and psychological well being in mothers and has numerous health advantages. Breastfeeding provides child spacing, that is, in short, known as LAM, lactational amenorrhea method. As long as the mother breastfeeds fully or nearly fully, and as long as her periods have not returned, her protection against pregnancy during the first 6 months is 98%. This family planning method is called lactational amenorrhea method, in short known as LAM. So breastfeeding results in reduction of anemia in the first hours and days after birth. Early breastfeeding brings out uterine contractions, preventing excessive blood loss. Over the following months, breastfeeding reduces the frequency and severity of anemia by delaying the return of monthly periods and helping the mother build her iron reserves. So, long-term importance of breastfeeding on mother's health. Breast cancer studies from US, China, Japan, New Zealand, the UK, and Mexico show that women who breastfeed their children have reduced risk of developing breast cancer and that the risk declines and increased duration of breastfeeding. Ovarian cancer. Breastfeeding for at least 2 months per child decreases the mother's risk of developing epithelial ovarian cancer. Osteoporosis. The risk of hip fracture amongst women over 65 is reduced by half for those who have breastfed. It decreases by another quarter for those who have breastfed each of their children and at least 9 months. Preparing for the arrival of the new baby, undergoing the birth process, and adapting to the child's first months are among the most extraordinary testing and emotional periods that parents and families experience. Loving, caring for, nurturing, but also worrying about one's child are normal feelings and are sometimes overwhelmed. Any illness takes an emotional toll on families. Sickness in a newborn baby or a working mother causes even more worry. Healthcare costs are constantly increasing and can represent considerable strain on the family budget. Breastfeeding strengthens family ties. Studies have shown the emotional and psychological importance as well as the bonding effects of breastfeeding to both mother and child. The importance of bonding is even greater when mothers return to work. Breastfeeding develops a mother's confidence in her physical and emotional capacities. Breastfeeding saves money and time. Saving of time because there is no need to go out to buy breast milk substitute or any other goods. Savings on the purchase of breast milk substitute and other feeding equipment. Formula feeding increases costs for medical care and medication. Formula feeding increases costs for child spacing and birth control methods. Less time preparing bottles, including fetching water, fuel, and cleaning utensils. Less time and worry spent on having to care for illness. that could often be avoided through breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is also very much important for employers, as when infants and children are sick, mothers or fathers often stay home to take care of them. National laws may allow parents to take holiday leave or to call in sick themselves. The absenteeism is costly to employers and to national budgets for healthcare. Moreover, many employed women have only a short period of paid maternity leave. If they want to breastfeed their babies, it is important to set up favorable conditions at the workplace. Many labor laws provide paid or unpaid daily breastfeeding breaks, and many employees set up breastfeeding facilities on site for their female workers. Adequate hygienic facilities for breastfeeding or expressing and storing breast milk are relatively easy and inexpensive to provide. Studies in the USA and elsewhere have shown that breastfeed babies have statistically fewer episodes of illness, that formula fed infants and that mothers of breastfed babies were less absent, only 25% of one-day maternal absence than mothers of bottle-fed babies. Breastfeeding contributes towards a more stable workforce. Employees who support their female employees, maternity benefits, breastfeeding breaks, rest periods, note improved staff morale, less turnover, and increased loyalty to the enterprise. Breastfeeding is also important for society. Breast milk is a living substance and it is unique, irreplaceable, specifically tailored to the changing needs of each baby, and it is the first human food par excellence, the best example of humanity can sustain itself through provision of a complete food for human babies. Breastfeeding also makes economic sense because it's less costly to produce than formula. It allows society to make considerable savings in healthcare costs. Breastfeeding helps to protect the environment. Environment friendly in its production, consumption, and disposal. Breastfeeding is a natural and renewable resource. Reduction in industrial production, transportation, packaging, and disposal pollution. Breastfeeding produces hardly any waste. Breastfeeding has similar economic importance. Nations can have huge amounts on purchase and distribution of commercial breast milk substitutes, often in foreign exchange. In India, for example, at the national level, women produce approximately 3,900 million liters of milk over a two-year period, which corresponds to the usual lactation period of Indian mothers. If the milk has been purchased in the form of tinned cow's milk, it would have the cost close to $3 billion or more than 3 times the combined budgets of the Departments of Education, Health and Family Welfare and Science and Technology during that same period of time. In Guatemala, annual spending on breast milk substitutes amount to approximately $48 million. Savings on healthcare expenses for preventable acute and chronic illness. An Australian study calculated that if breastfeeding at 3 months of age increased in prevalence from 60 to 80%, Australian dollars 3.7 million would be saved on treating gastrointestinal diseases alone. Researchers in Newfoundland, Canada estimated that improved prevalences of breastfeeding could save the province up to the Canadian $370,000 per year on the care of babies with asthma and eczema. Breastfeeding has a positive impact on society at every level. It is all the more important that the responsibility for protecting and promoting breastfeeding and for supporting women to optimally breastfeed is borne by a society as a whole. Now let's look at the regulations, International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes and Resolutions So what is the International Code? This is an introduction to the provisions of the International Code and resolutions. The World Health Organization and UNICEF have for many years emphasized the importance of maintaining the practice of breastfeeding and of reviving the practice where it is in decline. As a way to improve the health and nutrition of infants and young children, a variety of factors influence the prevalence and duration of breastfeeding. The 27th World Health Assembly in 1974 noted the general decline in breastfeeding related to different factors, including the production of manufactured breast milk substitutes, and urged member countries to review sales promotion activities on the baby foods and to introduce appropriate remedial measures, including advertisement codes and legislation where necessary. The 33rd World Health Assembly in May 1980 endorsed in their entirety the statement and recommendations agreed by consensus at the Joint World Health Organization UNICEF meeting and made particular mention of the recommendation that there should be an international code of marketing of infant formula and other products used as breast milk substitutes. In May 1981, the Health Assembly debated the issue after it had been introduced by the representative of the Executive Board. It adopted the code as proposed on 21st May by 118 votes as per World Health Organization. So the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes was adopted by the World Health Assembly in 1981 as a minimum requirement to protect infant health and is to be implemented in its entirety. The document introduces the key provisions of the International Code and subsequent relevant resolutions of the World Health Assembly. It is an unique instrument, the International Code, which is also a unique and indispensable tool to protect and promote breastfeeding, an equally unique but threatened practice, and to ensure that marketing of breast milk substitutes, feeding bottles, and teats is appropriate. The International Code was the first of its kind, an internationally adopted and endorsed basic minimum requirement to protect healthy practices in respect of infant and young child feeding. Although less binding than a treaty or a convention, the International Code is an international public health recommendation to regulate the marketing of breast milk substitutes adopted by the World Health Assembly, WHO. Although WHO recommendations are generally not binding, they carry moral or political weight as they constitute the judgment on a health issue of collective membership of the highest international body in the fields of health. The implementation and global impact of the International Code, the WHO comprises the ministers of health of the world's governments and their advisors, eminent experts in the field of public health or specific health issues. Although the United States voted against the International Code in 1981, 13 years later, the Clinton administration endorsed the code in the WHO resolution of 1994, giving the International Code the support of every member state of WHO. The International Code was prepared by the World Health Organization and the United Nations Children Fund, UNICEF, after a process of widespread consultation with governments, the infant feeding industry, professional associations, and NGOs. It is weaker than the ideal, and some definitions and articles are open to interpretation. The industry has used imaginative methods to circumvent certain elements. When the International Code was adopted under WHO Resolution 34.22, it was recognized that experience and new scientific thinking would require the issue to be revisited. The Director General of World Health Organization was charged with producing a report in every even years on the state of implementation and to give suggestions and further action. Accordingly, resolutions have been adopted clarifying and amplifying the International Code. These subsequent relevant resolutions enjoy the same status as the International Code itself. The international code and resolutions are to be implemented in a variety of ways. Member states of WHO are to implement the international code in national measures in its entirety as a minimum requirement. They should similarly implement subsequent World Health Organization resolutions. Manufacturers and distributors are called on to abide by the international code independently by other measures. NGOs, professional groups, institutions, and individuals are called on to report violations. Other international bodies such as the FAO, World Health Organization, Codex Alimentarius, Commission are called on to support and promote implementation of the international. So other international bodies such as FAO, WHO, Codex Alimentarius, Commission are called on to support and promote implementation of the international code. The provisions of the international code and resolutions have been incorporated into other international agreements such as the Innocenti Declaration and parts of it in directives of the European Union. Implementation of the international code and the resolution is recognized as one of the measures for governments to fulfill a country's obligations under the Convention of the Rights of the Child. In various countries, we have different laws pertaining to breastfeeding. So we'll just quickly look at, India. In India, we have India Code 2002, infant milk substitutes and feeding bottle and infant foods amendment bill. And then we have India Code, infant milk substitutes, feeding bottles and infant food amendment act 2003, and India Code 1992, infant milk substitute, feeding bottles and infant food act 1992. So this is the oldest one. So these acts are there. We will look into these in detail in coming days. So we will move on to other aspects. So till here, if you have any queries, you can feel free to ask or share in chat box so that we can reflect upon, or we can address your concerns, if any. Okay. So if there are no queries, then we'll move on. So now let's learn about various activities, or let's look at various aspect opportunities or various activities of BPNI, which is Breastfeeding Promotion Network of India. So the Breastfeeding Promotion Network of India, in short known as BPNI, was founded on 3rd December 1991 at Wardha, Maharashtra. It is a national network of organizations and individuals dedicated to promote mother and child health through protection, promotion, and support of breastfeeding. So, about the history, as narrated by Dr. Arun Gupta, says, in 1979, our daughter was born. My wife and I, being doctors and strong supporters of breastfeeding, decided that she should be breastfed exclusively for the first months. But we failed in a few days, there being no support available from the family or the healthcare system. The prevailing bottle feeding culture was too strong. The little girl had to give up breastfeeding by 5 to 6 months. The story was repeated in 1981 when our son was born. At that point of time, we started looking for information on how one could succeed in breastfeeding, but failed to find anything. We found ourselves in a position where women were only exhorted to follow optimal guidelines for breastfeeding, but not supported to do so. So they often failed in their efforts to provide their babies with the best food. Years passed by, more and more women adopted bottle feeding culture as a modern practice. According to a simple research conducted by us in 1983 and 84 in Jalandhar town, where we lived and practiced bottle feeding, was an accepted norm of feeding newborn babies and young infants in all the 17 maternity hospitals. So we attempted to bring changes in the existing hospital practice through a campaign that included personal advocacy with the doctors and putting up posters in the maternity facilities. However, nothing seemed to work. Commercial influence of infant formula industry on healthcare professionals was more than visible. The companies continued to benefit the healthcare system with free supplies of infant formula as well as sponsorship of their academic meetings. So this had a visible impact on the attitude of doctors who were generally unsupportive to breastfeeding or would tend to ignore it because of their own lack of proper information. Bottle feeding was not considered a health hazard. Their knowledge about the breastfeeding or lactation management, a term that came to the scene later, was limited as ours. So, they strongly believed that the exclusive breastfeeding was impossible to practice and the need of supplementary milk feeds during early days of child life was justified, and so infant formula came handy. So, doctors believed that they knew enough on breastfeeding posted as a barrier. At this point, I got in touch with other like minded people, particularly Dr. Raj Anand from Mumbai, who had been spearheading consumer and breastfeeding issues. I invited him to Jalandhar during the height of terrorist violence in Punjab to speak on how the baby food industry interfered with the feeding of babies. He came and spoke fearlessly to the surprise of audience. In the same year, we also got involved in the advocacy work of Volunteer Health Association of India, in short known as VHAI, for the enactment of a law to regulate marketing practices of baby food companies, exploring how to intervene to bring about change in hospital practices and how to counsel mothers effectively became our objective in 1986. Fortunately, in 1989, I got linked to the International Baby Food Action Network, IFAN, and took part in its 10th year forum in Manila, where I met the stalwarts working on infant feeding issues. I got an opportunity to be being trained in breastfeeding and human lactation management. I decided to take up the 5-day training and learn the skill. This was in spite of being ridiculed by my friends and seniors. Next year, in 1990, my wife went for this training. The training gave us the light of hope, the knowledge and the skill we were missing. In the same year, we decided to move to Delhi in a bid to take on the issue of breastfeeding, along with other like minded friends. Little did we know what was in store for us, but we took the risk of giving up our 30-bed hospital in Jalandhar and start afresh in Delhi. In 1991, AC, ACASH, IAP, and FOGSI organized the Super Trainer Workshop on recent advances in human lactation and breastfeeding management at Varda. And I got invited. On the last day of the training, December 3rd, 1991, one of the crucial recommendations that emerged was to have an organized front for advocacy on breastfeeding. The participants even gave it a name. Thus, Breastfeeding Promotion Network of India was born. On 27th March 1992, Dr. R.K. Anand, Dr. N.B. Kunta, Dr. Tasan Jindal, and myself met over an informal dinner at my place in Delhi. We decided to pool in some money and gave BPNI a go. Dr. Anand asked me a question: would you be able to manage? I could only answer yes, though I had not yet fully understood what challenge were ahead of me. at that time. Thereafter, BPNI started functioning in full strength as a volunteer force of zonal coordinators who were trained together and sat together to set up BPNI. We began imparting training to our fellow colleagues and students of institutions we worked in. Formal activities started happening in very next year, like organizing World Breastfeeding Week in India. And it was here the BPNI got linked to a new global organization, the World Alliance for Breastfeeding Action, in short known as WABA. And they asked us to act as a focal point of South Asia, lobbying for a legislation to regulate marketing agencies of baby food companies was a major work as a continuum of what we had been doing before. In 1992, first victory came when a battle in a bigger war was won as the Infant Milk Substitute Feeding Bottles and Infant Foods Regulation of Production, Supply and Distribution Act 1992, in short known as IMS Act, was enacted. Over the years, BPNI started playing an increasing role in policy analysis and development as well as monitoring the IMS Act and strengthening its position with the government. Many other areas of action evolved as we worked on broadening our agenda. BPNI was notified in the Gazette of India and was assigned a role to monitor the compliance of the Act along with ACASH and two more semi-government organizations. While ACASH filed complaints against violations in Mumbai, BPNI filed one in Delhi and on behalf of ACAH in 1994. So the major role of BPNI was being defined as a special advocate for sound infant feeding policies. We went to government offices to do advocacy, only to be shown the door. However, even as BPNI added new issues to its agenda, and the focus broadened to include issues like child health, survival, nutrition, and development, our advocacy was having its impact. In 1993, the first National Family Health Survey included an indicator on exclusive breastfeeding. Apart from having the IMS Act over these years, several milestones were achieved. In the year 2000, an additional legislative protection was granted to breastfeeding through the Cable TV Networks Amendment Act that banned any advertisement of the infant milk substitutes, infant foods, and feeding bottles in the cable TV network service. BPNI entered the international arena as a member of infant movement. It had a role to stimulate action in the South Asian region. In 1996, BPNI was awarded to be strong regional advocate at the WABA Global Forum in Bangkok. In 1997, I was elected to represent South Asia in the International Baby Food Action Network, IFAN. In 1998, the IFAN network received the Right Livelihood Award. Popularly known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. This was very encouraging for all of us to keep our energies high. So this was the history of BPNI. So tomorrow we will look at various other aspects of BPNI, and we will quickly look at the commemorations of the day. Today is also commemorated as Blogger Day in US, which is celebrated on August 5th every year. This day celebrates one of the most popular platforms in the world. It is Blogger. Anyone who has ever created a blog before has mostly likely used Blogger. So this platform allows people to express themselves for either personal or commercial reasons. Some bloggers use blogs to disseminate information, and it has been a very good way to consume news, ranging from politics to sports, technology, lifestyle, and a host of other topics. This day should be well celebrated, especially by the blogging community, as it celebrates one of the platforms that contribute to our freedom of speech. Today is also commemorated as Burkina Faso Independence Day in Burkina Faso on August 5th every year. It is a public holiday in Burkina Faso and it falls on the weekend. The next weekday becomes a public holiday. The day commemorates the gaining of Burkina Faso independence from France, is marked with celebrations all over the country. The country has over 20 million citizens, and so the celebrations are loud from both government and parades and the citizens taking up different ways to celebrate the day. The flag of Burkina Faso is usually hung from homes to shops on the day, and people decorate in the colors of the flag red, green, and yellow. Today is also commemorated as Culturama Day in St. Kitts and Nevis. Culturama is a public holiday celebrated in St. Kitts and Nevis on Tuesday, following the first Monday in August of each year. This year it falls on August 5th. It's a festival that highlights the island's cultural history and prolongs the Emancipation Day festivities by one day. Although there are many events throughout the Caribbean, this one stands apart. Non-essential public offices, schools, and most business are closed on this day. It's also a holiday for the general public, allowing everyone to participate in the festivities. Even though the festival is celebrated each year in August, the festivities usually began in the end of July and last throughout August. Today is also commemorated as National Oyster Day in US on August 5th each year. US honors this very special mollusk, the oyster, for National Oyster Day, enjoyed as seafood in many parts of the world. This fine delicacy needs no introduction, but someone certainly thought it could be used a celebration. Boil it, eat it fresh, put it in soup. There are many delicious ways to feast on oysters and just as many ways to enjoy this particular day. So keep reading on Learn How to Celebrate National Oyster Day 2021. Fun and interesting facts about oysters. The answer on whether you'll be able to locate a pearl in the next oyster you eat, and so much more. So oysters have been around for a long time, and scientists believe they were one of the Earth's first living inhabitants. In fact, they have found fossils of oysters that date back to when dinosaurs walked the earth. Not only have these little jewels been around for ages, but they have been a source of food for just as long. Early humans preferred tossing oysters into the fire rather than prying them open with tools or stone, data shows. Archaeologists have found evidence that proves people from coastal regions consumed oysters regularly. Fossil oyster shells from various periods prove this without a doubt. Oysters were important to many civilizations. The Greeks loved them so much that they began to cultivate oysters. They were the very first civilization in the world to do so. Fishermen would scatter pieces of broken pottery in places where oysters grew to encourage baby oysters to attach themselves to the pieces. They would then transport these pieces, baby oysters, in tow to other places. These guys even found use for oyster shells. Using them to cast ballots during voting time, Greek myths also began to feature the oyster, the famous Greek goddess of beauty and love. Aphrodite is said to have been born from the sea in the oyster. After Greek civilization declined, the Romans took up the mantle, continuing to hold oysters in high regard. They became part of the rich Romans' meals and also appeared in Roman mythology. The Romans' love for the oyster led to Over harvesting, however, causing a scarcity, they attempted harvesting and transplanting them. But nothing struck. By the time the world entered the 8th century, this rich man's food was now considered a common delicacy. Between 18th and 19th centuries, the world entered a period called the Golden Age of Oysters. Even the famous satirist, essayist, poet, and author Jonathan Swift was a fan. There was a massive surge in oyster production, making it cheaper to procure. This led to the oyster being featured in dining rooms across the US and Europe. So, with this, we shall end today's commemorations. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we request everyone to quickly fill up the feedback form before you leave the platform. So, tomorrow and in coming days, we'll be also looking at various aspects of breastfeeding. So keep joining us and invite your friends and colleagues to be part of these celebrations. So see you all tomorrow with the same joining link, with the same time at 6 o'clock. Take care. Good night.